Built in 3600 BC, the Neolithic temples of Gantija have always stood proud on the rugged landscape that surrounds them. As early as the 17th century, scholars took note of these structures and associated their massive size to a mythical race of giants. Gantija was no different, and its massive outer walls and as yet unexcavated interior earned it the name Torre de Giganti, or Gantija. In the 17th and 18th century, Malta and Gozo became one of the ports of call of the so-called Grand Tour, a voyage across Europe, the Mediterranean and the Near East, undertaken mainly by British and Northern European nobles, antiquarians, diplomats and artists. When visiting Gozo, many included Gantija in their itineraries. Their visits were often recorded in great detail on personal journals, maps, plans and artistic representations, a number of which have luckily survived. A few hundred meters away, the circle of stone blocks which originally marked the Shara stone circle attracted the attention of the same visitors. Jean Houel's 1787 engravings of the site give us a rare glimpse of what the site looked like before the stone circle was destroyed in the 19th and 20th centuries. Both a blessing and a curse, the curiosity which brought the site to light was also the reason for its depredation. In the 1820s, Colonel Otto Bayer, then governor of the islands, started clearing the remains of Gantija, but left no account of his discoveries, except for keeping a few striking objects. Only a few years later, part of the Shara circle suffered the same fate. It is only through the engravings and paintings of artists such as Luigi Mazzara, and even more so Charles Frederick de Brockdorff in the late 1820s, that any record remains of these clearing campaigns. Brockdorff's watercolours are snapshots of life at the time, with local farmers looking on as curious foreigners visit the site or climb the large blocks to take measurements. Some of these paintings reveal features at Gantija which have been lost over time, such as this feature within the South Temple, or even the large trilithon doorway and megalithic wall which Brockdorff depicts beneath the terrace wall in front of the temples. At the Shara circle, a rare painting shows a figure coming out of the site, holding aloft a skull, clearly indicating the clearing of the burial chambers. Others show the megaliths which once formed part of the stone circle and which have since been lost. For many years, paintings and descriptions by Brockdorff, La Marmora, and their contemporaries were the only evidence that the Shara circle ever existed. In fact, by the 1840s, the site had already been turned back into a field, and the stone blocks had been broken up and carried off, leaving no indication of what still lay underneath the soil. Now everything is destroyed, and as we got here today, we found a number of people trying to break the last two pillars which were still there. In the meantime, Gantija continued attracting the attention of many curious visitors, as well as distinguished scholars, such as Albert Mayer. Mayer was the first to realize that these sites were much older than was commonly thought. Already in those early years, visitors were noticing that the site was deteriorating rapidly. It was constantly vandalized by the owners of the land in search of elusive Greek vases, and by farmers trying to cultivate the land. Trees were growing within the apses, and several blocks fell off their place. The early 20th century was a turning point for Gantija and other archaeological ruins. Greater awareness of the duty to conserve these unique remains led the government to purchase the land on which Gantija stands in 1933. It was in 1936 that archaeological investigations and restoration of the temples started in earnest. These continued up to and beyond 1949, when Gantija was officially opened to the public. It was not long after that the Shara circle, which had lain lost and forgotten since the 1840s, was rediscovered by a Gozitan scholar. Joe Attard Tabone worked tirelessly to locate the lost prehistoric cemetery until finally he published his discovery on the local newspapers in 1965. The late 20th century was a busy time for both sites. In 1980, Gantija became the first of the megalithic temples to be recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Shara Circle was the focus of large-scale scientific excavations between 1987 and 1994.
On Sicily and in southern Italy, for example, you have little rock-cut tombs set about in cemeteries with very few individuals represented, perhaps no more than 20, 30, 50 people at the very most. So what we have is a unique document of a scientifically excavated population where we're able to look in detail at the individuals and their health and perhaps their diet as well.
Nowadays, the main concern for these 5,000-year-old sites is their preservation. Rain, wind, sun, dust, and mankind have all had an impact on these sites. Original stones and surfaces have been destroyed or have deteriorated beyond repair. We now wage a constant battle against these elements to slow down their effects with the help of the Scientific Committee for the Conservation of the Megalithic Temples, which studies the problems and investigates solutions. The Shara Circle was mostly reburied to preserve the remaining archaeological deposits. At Gantija, the situation is more delicate and complex.
Well, the supporting structure in the Gantija, the megalithic temples, were installed in the 80s in two stages. The first one on the south facade, in order to respond to a perception that there was movement outwards. And the second set to respond to the fact there is a discontinuation in the walling in the corner of the inner apse. The supporting structure was meant as a preventive measure until we could understand the stability of the structure. It's not an easy thing to determine the existing life of a structure. It is obviously in equilibrium because it hasn't collapsed yet, but in view of the fact that it's exposed to the elements, then the deterioration at the junctions may lead to a sudden collapse. So the scaffolding was inserted in order to prevent that. The idea is that gradually we'll make a series of experiments which will allow us to start removing one by one and from the upper levels and studying the response of the structure when those elements are removed. We find that the structure is stable or can be stabilized, then eventually the whole supporting system can be removed or replaced by something which we say will be needed on a permanent basis.
Today, the monitoring of the remains and environmental conditions, reversible repairs on the megaliths, and the installation of protective measures are only a few of the measures taken to ensure the survival of this World Heritage Site for future generations.